it's COG here, talking for Sphere System. Going to be discussing sensory programs in TBMC today. Content modeling is obviously for TBMC content, and light discussion of hallucinations. Other than that, don't think there's anything. Yeah, so sensory programs come in three styles effectively. You have hyposensory, where sensory input is reduced, which limits awareness and filters out inputs from conscious awareness. You have hypersensitivity, where sensory inputs are heightened, you gain heightened awareness, filters are reduced, reducing the ability to filter out things that are unnecessary or potentially increasing the amount of information being provided significantly. And obviously hallucinatory sensory programs, which are where, people know what hallucination is. Sure, you can understand obviously what a hallucinatory sensory program would be. It's one that generates false sensory inputs based on creating hallucinations in some form or another, often visual, but they can be obviously auditory or olfactory or what's the word for taste based? I don't know. Someone in the system might know, or someone in the comments, but I don't. So yeah, taste based as well. And the point here is to mess with the system's perceptions of reality. The how comes down to obviously a deliberate messing with the senses, so limiting what senses are active at given times to or deliberately creating filters by continuously exposing them to particular sensory inputs. So for example, you want them to filter out from consciousness a particular keyword, you just keep repeating that keyword in their ear and for long enough and it will suddenly become background noise. That's something that can be done, and then that keyword is no longer noticed consciously because it's filtered out. Well, it's easier with cue sounds over cue words because words are often built in a way to where you want to be able to not filter them out at times. But yes, the same basic principle applies. And then the opposite can be done as well, in where you expose someone to a noise and expect them to pick it up every time, regardless. So you throw it at them at times where they are in high sensory input environments where it's difficult to pick out individual sensory inputs, and you expect them to pick out that particular input again and again and again and punish them for not. Yeah. And of course, hallucinations, you can aggravate and reinforce hallucinations that you want, that people are already generating. You can limit access to anti-hallucinatory medicines that might be helpful, or access to good, helpful mental health staff and professionals who do exist and would help limit those through proper treatment. Yeah, and then obviously, you can aggravate hallucinations by providing hallucinatory drugs and guiding them in certain directions as well. Reinforcing certain ones, that sort of thing. Yeah. As to the why, well, obviously, if someone's reality is controlled by their sensory inputs, so by controlling those sensory inputs to a larger degree, one can have their reality controlled. which is of course incredibly valuable. It can help significantly limit safe life for awareness. It can limit the ability to find cues. It can make somebody appear crazy and someone who can't be listened to or trusted with their testimony if they do escape, because so much of their perceived reality is locked up in hallucinations that apparently none of their testimony can be trusted. That's something that can be done there and is encouraged. Obviously, limiting safe life for awareness, especially increased pain filters are a common one there. So the safe lifers have pain filters around them at all times so they don't notice the pain the body is in. That gets redirected away when they're in front. In terms of deprogramming, so obviously the first thing to do is to look for those filters and to figure out which ones are helpful mechanisms put in place naturally to help you decipher the world, because there is too much sensory input for the conscious mind to filter through itself, and the subconscious does a lot of that work, and that can be very helpful. So finding the filter, working through those filters and figuring out which ones are helpful subconscious, filtering out things that you actually don't need, and which ones are ones that are put there deliberately to hide useful information to you. The other thing to do is to look for where filters are lower than one would expect and at a point where they are not serving the useful function they should be. Right, looking at both of those, and then working with it's often going to be shell alters who are responsible for filters, and working with those shell alters to gain better control over those filtering methods and techniques. Working to get a more helpful and pleasant experience out of those filters effectively, because those filters are going to continue to exist in some form, and those shell alters are going to continue to have the ability to access those filters and at those levels. They might be able to they're going to be able to learn greater control over when they front and possibly even when they filter stuff, but you're still going to have access to those filters, generally speaking, which means that you can turn them to your own use if you want. So, for example, so you might want to turn someone who filters out the cue from safe life for awareness to instead filtering it out for the person whose cue that is, if that's something people involved are willing to do. And that might help you avoid a particular cue that is causing problems to you and you can't deprogram in and of itself yet. That's one example of where that filtration might be more helpful than it is harmful. That is, of course, going to require significant work with the shell alter involved in the filtration. And probably you want the cooperation or agreement of the one who's been cued, although depending on the cue, you might decide for safety that it is worth doing that regardless of their agreement. That's something to be careful with, of course. The other thing to do is, if filters are purely unhelpful and need to be changed, if it's one that is hypersensitivity in some form, you can look to with the filter alters, or the filter, if it's not a headmate in and of itself, just with that filter active, deliberately pay more attention and work past those filters to pay more attention to your surroundings and the senses that are being filtered higher, and to deliberately listen out for those things that are being filtered out and work doing that, and that will work through them with time. And the opposite can be done for hypersensitivity, wherein, where you're expecting to, if you're thinking you need to pay attention to all the senses, for example, or your senses are being unfiltered, limiting the amount of information coming in significantly and allowing a moment of calm effectively on those senses can be incredibly vulnerable and repeated work like that can get those involved used to a lower sensory input level, which allows then for the filters to go back up to a more helpful level. So this is a similar approach to what we've done in terms of working through emotional filters with empty, wherein when empty's near front and we have the time and presence for it, we have gone through and deliberately paid special attention to our emotions and to feeling them at those times to allow for empty to feel those emotions and to understand them better. Yeah. And the other thing to do is to work through deprogramming the front and front cues for filters, which can be incredibly valuable in gaining a level of control over when those filters are active. By allowing control over when fronting happens. In terms of hallucinatory ones, that mostly comes down to, unfortunately, reality checking in one way or another, that in a way that works for you effectively. So you can reality check those hallucinations, and potentially working, if it's serious enough, obviously avoiding any hallucinatory drugs, but also getting the appropriate medication where that is appropriate, and working with one of the few good mental health professionals to ensure that you are getting the appropriate medication and other help and support that is necessary to deal with those. Much like anyone else who suffers from hallucinations for other reasons, effectively. You might also work through with those who have been programmed to specifically steer hallucinations, to work with them, because they have developed ways of determining what is when you're vulnerable to hallucination, obviously, and work with them to figure out what those are, and to share that, but also then to work with them to deprogram their need to steer hallucinations, much in the same way you would deprogram any other cue set effectively. Yeah, I think that's everything, so I'll leave you there. This system signing out. Hope to catch you all next week. Please do remember to like, subscribe, comment, especially if you've got any questions you want answered. Be happy to answer them either in the comments or in another video. So catch you all next week.